Hi there. Thank you so much for joining us today for Beyond the Asana. It's a podcast where we explore all things yoga, yoga teacher, wellness professional related. And we try to do exactly what the title suggests. We're trying to get beyond the asana. So we're taking a deeper look into yogic philosophy, a deeper look into what it means to be a yoga professional, a wellness professional, and dive into some fun and interesting things that I think all of us as wellness professionals probably can relate to. So, like I said, my name is Jess Prue, and I am joined today by Mike Williams, my partner in business and in life. We have a lot of these discussions all the time on things that are deeply rooted in philosophy, but today we're going to take a bit more of a superficial look at everything that we typically talk about and have a conversation around what it means to be a yoga teacher versus a yoga instructor, right? And
I think this podcast will be interesting in all of them because our conversations last hours.
yeah,
And these podcasts, we're trying to keep to like 30 minutes. So we'll try to squeeze it into 30
we'll
minutes.
try
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
really hard.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we won't have to edit out too much.
Yeah.
Yes, our conversations tend to get a little long winded, but we are going to make it as concise as possible. So, in this conversation around what it means to be a yoga teacher versus a yoga instructor, we've talked about this and we've had people comment when we have discussions on this is that it's just semantics, right? Like, do they mean the same thing? Are you just trying to like swap words and say, obviously a teacher is a teacher, an instructor is an instructor. And we look at it a little bit differently and we explore that a little bit more deeply. And so when you think of teacher versus instructor, is there something that pops out into your mind? Because you're a meditation teacher. So for you, what kind of pops out in your mind when you think of those two ways of looking at it? Maybe under the guise of meditation.
Specific for meditation, I just think the difference would be if you're talking about a teacher, the teacher is giving you information. They're telling you the what's of the practice. I think for a yoga or meditation instructor, there's more of a how component. So there's how do you do the thing that you just taught. So you could teach something and then you can instruct the way to do what was just taught.
Right.
So I think that's kind of the nuanced difference between the two.
Right. So like the instructor would be the how to, right? The step by step guide of exactly how you do this thing. The teacher gives you the why, acknowledges that there's a why behind it. And in meditation specifically, they could speak more to, I think, trauma, to nervous system regulation, maybe to where the deeper philosophies of Buddhism or even Yoga Darshana or Samkhya philosophy are woven into the practices that we do now.
Mm-hmm.
And so an instructor is able to say, take a seat, find your breath. And one is not more valuable than the
No.
other necessarily, right? Like I think both are hugely important.
Yeah, one is high level overview of what you're trying to accomplish, and one is more of a roadmap, right? So the instructor would give the roadmap to how to do whatever pose or posture, breath work. So the teacher would tell you why you're doing the breath work, but the instructor tells you what's going on in your brain when you're doing breath work, what's going on with your nervous system when you're doing breath work.
Right.
You're instructing someone and teaching them at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the analogies that I always use is the swimming deeper into swimming out into the deeper end of the pool. And I stole that from a teacher. So a teacher of mine from many years ago that said, a yoga instructor is, and an instructor of anything, right, is swimming more in the shallow end of the pool. And again, please don't take like shallow to mean that it's not valuable. It's hugely valuable, right? But that shallow end of the pool in the yoga world is like somebody who comes out of their 200-hour yoga teacher training, and they come out and they could give you that sort of high level of, I could put your body into different shapes, I could guide you through various breath work, through various meditation. But as somebody who wants to be a teacher, that means I have to swim into the deeper end of the pool if I want to pull my students out so that they could swim deeper as well. And that means that I have to be constantly studying, that I have to make my practice more rich. I have to make my practice more dynamic so that I'm able to share those concepts with my students.
Mm.
So if I just walked out of a 200-hour yoga teacher training, for instance, and said, I'm good, that's all I need, right? There's so much value in that, and you're going to help so many people. But if I want to take what I learned there as an instructor of physical movement, as an instructor of breath or meditation, and instead I want to guide people into something much deeper, have them understand the philosophies from which all of this stuff came, for them to understand the richness and value that all of this has, I myself have to continue to learn and continue to grow and continue to study.
Hmm.
And I think that's one of the toughest things when you get out of any sort of training, right? Is that in the moment it feels like I just consumed so much information and I know so much. How could there possibly be more? And I've been doing this for 25 years and 26 years almost. And I feel like I've picked up one grain of sand. And my education and my self study has been so robust. And so I think that would be the greatest lesson in all of it, right? Is where do you want to be? And how do you then decide to dive deeper?
So when you started teaching, you considered yourself more of a instructor at first or a teacher?
Absolutely. 1,000%. I was
So
an
you were an
instructor.
instructor
Oh,
first,
for
you were
sure.
instructing how to do the
Yes.
poses and
Yes.
stuff like that. When did you find that, oh, okay, if I add a little bit more depth here, a couple more layers,
Yeah.
and I'm actually teaching while I'm instructing,
Yeah.
how long did it take before you got to that point?
It was many years, right? So at the start of everything, I came into the yoga world as a dancer. And so everything felt physical to me. It had this really somatic component. I was also 18 years old. So I was coming at it from the mind of a young, inexperienced person. And so genuinely, and it's hard to look back and say this, but genuinely, I would want to kick people's asses. I wanted to make them sweat. I wanted to make class really hard. And that's what I thought as an 18-year-old kid that the value was in what I was providing.
I'm sure there's a little bit of ego in that as well,
A
right?
thousand
Because you
percent.
know all this stuff. You're like,
Yes.
I want to
I want to show you
show you everything I know,
everything.
right?
Yes. And I'm
I
going
want
to,
to impress you and
yes.
make it memorable for you.
Yes. And there's a little, you look back on it and there's a little part of it that was like, look what I can do.
Yeah,
You know
sure.
what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
look at how amazing my body can move. But eventually you start to get over that, right? And you realize that the biggest shifts for people were never in a downward facing dog. The biggest shifts for people in yourself never were in a physical practice. And I think it's when I started to go on retreat, it's when I started to go on silent retreat to study at Kripalu in Massachusetts. I, I spent a lot of time being quiet, and I also spent a lot of time with really amazing teachers. And it was with those teachers that my mind started to, you know, just, I just couldn't stop consuming all of this information. And I was so blown away by the way some of my teachers spoke about ancient philosophies, the way that they guided practices that you barely moved
Mm.
or didn't move at all. And that became the most life changing thing for me personally.
I sat through a 3-day silent retreat at Kripalu as well,
Yeah,
and not talking for 3 days, I learned more than I did in a lot of asana classes,
a
for
thousand
sure,
percent.
or meditation classes, just with your own thoughts. And you kind of look back silently at the books you read and the videos you've watched, and you're like, oh, that's what they meant by
Yeah,
this, because it's all in you, and the silence allows it to come out a little bit more than if you're doing a lot of this, right?
completely, completely. And what I think a lot of yoga students don't understand, and honestly, a lot of yoga teachers oftentimes don't understand, is that yoga, capital Y yoga, there's no movement practice associated with it at all. The yoga is the silence, right? The yoga is sort of this psychological unraveling. It's a way of dispelling all of the myths that you've sort of been led to believe throughout your entire life and coming to terms with who and what you truly are. Capital Y yoga doesn't ask you to move at all. We have different margas, different paths that started to draw movement in, like Hatha Marga, oftentimes called Hatha Yoga. But Hatha Marga is a path to the yoga. The practices of Hatha are not the yoga. The end goal is the yoga.
And correct me if I'm wrong, they're not even the asana technically,
Yeah.
right? Asana is what I'm doing right now, what you're doing right
Yes.
now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your seat for meditation.
Yeah. If we were talking about yoga darshana, for instance, Patanjali's yoga, when he talked about asana, this is what he meant:
Right.
just your seat for meditation. And so there was no physical practice associated with it. And I think it's when I started to learn that too, right? Where I recognized that I was associating a physical practice with something spiritual.
Mm.
And it was in that my mind started to shift. I am not saying that the physical practice doesn't guide you there, because it is one of those margas, right? It is a path to it, because we have to move through all of the things that we're holding on to in the physical body. And I think that for the majority of people, that is the greatest tool to start to get you there. We have to get through this stuff first, because it's the most tangible. It's the thing that we're most connected to. We could actually feel it, we could sense it, right? And so that becomes the thing, is that if you could start to get people moving, once they get moving, if you allow them the time, it only needs to be 3 minutes or 5 minutes, but you allow the time for silence, you allow the time to go inward, you allow the time for deep pranayama practice or meditation, that is where your students then start to say, like, I want to meet you out there.
Right.
I am so interested in that.
Yeah, and I remember noticing that from like my first or second class, my first, second yoga classes. You go through the bell curve of the class, you get the energy moving throughout that whole class, but really where you find yourself, I personally was Shavasana,
Yeah.
right? You lay in silence, you can feel the energy moving, still moving through your body from the practice that you just performed. But that's where it is, right?
Yeah.
You find the stillness after that movement, all that energy is flowing, and that's where the magic happened for me, at least.
Yeah,
Yeah.
1,000%. And I think, not to bring it back to myself again, but one of the things for me, you had asked me earlier, like, what was the shift? One of the biggest shifts for me too was that my body started to break down. And so my spine just decided, you're not doing this stuff anymore. And I lost the ability to feel my left leg. I lost the ability to walk properly. I had to go through multiple surgeries, and I could no longer be an instructor the way that I was before. It couldn't happen. There was no flipping my dog. I couldn't even walk. My fellow teachers at the studio that I owned at the time had to hold me up by my armpits to get me into the studio so that I could actually teach a practice.
And then you weren't you laying down
I
when you
laid
were
down on
doing
the
that?
floor for almost a year. I taught classes literally laying on the floor, and barely able to move. I had to show up because I loved it so much. But
I noticed that you said I taught classes while I was laying down. You didn't
yeah,
instruct classes, you
no,
taught
I
classes.
taught
Right.
classes, right? And I think that my classes, my physical practice as I was teaching that, softened, and it became more of this really deep experience of feeling, this really deep expression and connection of the layers of the physical body and the mind and the emotion and the spirit, and sort of all the little spaces in between those things.
Mm.
And as I moved deeper, my students just ate it up. Like, they could not get enough of it. And it really sparked me to want to do more, to want to be more as a teacher and show up more for them. And so, yeah, that was how I sort of moved through that experience. But I think so much of it comes with life experience. It comes with maturity,
Mm-hmm.
right? It comes with time spent with your students,
Right.
time spent understanding what people want and what people need. And there are going to be those groups of people that are solely interested in a vinyasa practice. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's beautiful practice.
Were you able to teach from a place where what you learned throughout your 200-hour was enough to do that, or did you find that you had to also supplement that with additional studying
Yeah.
and practice?
I, I personally believe that a 200-hour yoga teacher training is literally a foundation. I was watching a podcast the other day and I heard a yoga teacher kind of having similar conversations. And I heard him say that he thought that anybody who got their 200-hour should have to teach under the direction of another teacher for at least a year before they're teaching on their own and kind of branching out. Now, I don't know if we need all of the rules and all of that
Mm,
stuff behind it, but I do look at a 200-hour training as absolutely just a foundation.
yeah.
I don't necessarily say then you have to do a 500-hour. You have to,
No.
I don't mean that, but I do mean that you do need to be experiencing what it means to be on retreat. And I don't mean like partying
Yeah.
in, and doing that sort of thing, which there's room for that too, of course. But I mean like legitimately being in silence and going into those deeper experiences. I mean, allowing yourself the space to sort of start to explore sacred texts, not all of them, right? Like my teacher would say, you could never consume all of that in a lifetime, and you were never meant to.
No.
This was meant to be the start of the journey here, and then in subsequent lifetimes, you go deeper and deeper and
Hmm.
deeper. Chances are I've done this in other lives. Um,
And I've heard a lot of people say, there's so much. Someone should just pick
yeah,
one pinpoint and go deep, vertical and deep in that one, and become an expert and really understand that to its fullest
I
instead
love
of
that.
being, spread across many different disciplines and stuff like that.
I've heard
Yeah,
that a million
yeah,
times, and I think that that's absolutely brilliant. And I think maybe that's a difficult thing too, right? Is that we become instructors in all of the things. I want to
right,
be an instructor of all of the things. And there's a place for that. And it's important for people in the wellness industry to be diversified. So
right.
I'm not saying they should not do that. But when it comes to the deeper practices, like for me, yoga darshana is sort of the one that I really tend to put a lot of focus in. In my earlier days of teaching, it was Buddhism. That was really hugely important to me, and it always will be. Such an important part of my life. But in the years of teaching, the more that I teach advanced practices, the more that I teach advanced teachers, yoga darshana has become that. And so you go from, reading the Yoga Sutras to reading like Vyasa's Vyasa and trying to understand the Yoga Sutras. And then the eight limbs become the least interesting part of the
Mm,
entire thing. And you start to dive into yogic psychology and all of these really interesting takes on the human experience. And I
yeah,
think that, yeah, the more that we could dive in and explore those things,
yeah. I think I
the more
understood
fun.
the eight limbs better after I studied Buddhism a little bit and Yoga Darshana,
Yeah,
because you can kind of connect more dots that way when you know those a lot of that foundational stuff.
yeah, yeah, 1000%.
Yeah.
So I guess to sort of wrap up the whole idea between, yoga teacher versus yoga instructor, what would for somebody studying meditation, for instance, and they, went through, did their meditation training, did all of that, what would, your biggest word of advice be to somebody who wants to get beyond the asana and start to move more toward that teacher role?
I think it comes with time, like you said before. So if you teach enough classes and you have enough experiences with your students and you start to have some conversations with students, your students then share their
Mm.
experience with you, and you're starting to tailor your class or your instruction or your teaching based off of those conversations. So, coming out of the gate right off the bat and wanting to teach all this in-depth stuff is good, but for me, having those conversations, going on retreats with people,
Mm-hmm.
and they tell me that the experiences they have in meditation and what that gave them, I can then take that input and then use that to share with others. Because if one person is having that experience, odds are many people are having that experience.
Mm.
So just based off of that, you want to, and then it forces you to study more too. Like they
Yeah.
ask you a question, you're like, oh, I didn't really know the answer to that. And then you look into it, you're like, oh, that's brilliant. I could use that in my classes.
Yeah.
So for me, is that experience of having those conversations that was invaluable.
I love that.
Yeah,
So I guess one of our biggest takeaways is to listen and to
yeah,
pay attention, right? And I think one of the things that I always teach in trainings, 205 or whatever the training is that it's not your practice, right?
right,
Like in the moment of being teacher, it's not your practice.
right.
And so I think that that is one of the most valuable lessons is to listen.
Mm,
What do people need? What do they want? Uh, what I thought people needed and wanted and heard from them 20 years ago now is so different post COVID. The way that we explore our own feelings, the way that we express ourselves, communication, all of
mm,
those things have shifted and changed so much in the almost 30 years that I've been doing this. Um, that that I guess also becomes part of the swimming out deeper is knowing that you need to shift and change as we learn more, as
right.
the world changes, as we you know decide we're ready to do better.
Yeah, and even on a more micro level than that, one of the practices that we use when we teach meditation is in the beginning of the practice, you consciously notice how you feel.
Yeah.
How does your body feel right now? How does your mind feel right now? And then you go through the practice and then you ask that same question again.
Mm-hmm.
How does your body feel now? How does your mind feel now? And there may or may not be a difference there. And if there's not, that's okay. But a lot of people come out of that meditation saying that my body's more relaxed, my mind calmed down, or I learned that once thoughts are started to pop back up in my head, I use my tools to go back to my breath and it allowed me to calm my mind down. And in many cases they're able to use that in the real world.
Yeah.
They're in a situation at work or with family or whoever it may be where they notice that tension rise up, but they've trained themselves to focus on their breath or focus on something in their eyesight that they could focus on, one point of focus.
Yeah.
And they use those tools and those lessons from class in the
Yeah.
real world. So hearing that from people, then when you're instructing the next time or teaching the next time,
Sure.
excuse me,
Yeah.
you know what to teach them and what to
Right.
talk about.
Right,
Yeah,
right. They
yeah,
want to get, they want to take it off of their cushion or off their mat or whatever it
right.
is. They need,
Beyond the
they need,
asana,
right.
beyond the asana of the
Yeah,
seat. Yeah,
right. They
yeah,
need applied tools
right,
or tools they can apply,
right.
however you want to look at that.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for chatting
Thank
with
you.
me
Yeah.
for the millionth
I'm
time,
looking forward
probably
to doing a
today.
lot more of this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us for Beyond the Asana, where we take a deep dive into all things yoga teacher, wellness professional related. My name is Jess Prue. This is Mike Williams, and we hope you have a absolutely beautiful day. Thank you so much.
Bye.